welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell, and no, this isn't a repeat. This is a new episode of the Kongversation discussing a topic we have just recently discussed, but we're discussing it again. It's another Stop N Swop episode, and joining me to discuss Stop N Swop again for another discussion of Stop N Swop is Steve from Off of Rare Gamer.
Yeah, 3 hours it wasn't enough, Hyle. We need to keep going.
What I want to see, Steve, is a top 5 list on Rare Gamer of DK Vine's Stop N Swop Kongversation episodes. So if we can just do 3 more after this, you'll be golden.
I'm just hoping that we can reach that 24-hour mark and then just loop it forever. You know, just do it day by day.
Yeah, it is doable. Believe it or not, like all we need to do is just fill this with inane chatter and go on some off-topic rants. Or, you know, we could just talk about Stop N Swop. See, the problem, what happened last time is that we gave the complete like oral history of Stop N Swop as we best understood it. And then 2 days later, it was immediately irrelevant because we got more information, spurred in part because of the episode we did. So there's no getting around it. It was going to happen, but it was just, as I said on Twitter when announcing that we were doing this episode, I feel like we are in a loop at this point. We're going to get into all of that and everything we've learned about Stop N Swop since the last episode. But first, I just wanted to plug a few things. Just a few things. So I want to plug our Patreon. So E3 is coming up, and DK Vine will be giving our usual level of E3 coverage. However, E3 is virtual this year, so we don't have to go out to Los Angeles, which means I can save some money and put it towards things other than, you know, lodging, airfare, food, everything that's required for, you know, our expeditions out to LA every June, minus last June. So, I just wanted to plug DK Vine on Patreon. Your money will not be going towards airfare this year, and I can use it to improve our equipment, our content creating machines, and hopefully, produce better, higher quality content as we go on through 2021. But yeah, E3 is coming. I'm excited about it. And if you're excited about it, if you want exclusive coverage of the Donkey Kong universe, of Rare, Playtonic, whatever, then DK Vine is the place to be. We won't talk about fucking AAA titles, your Call of Duties. No, not here. We're going to talk about what really matters, and that's Donkey Kong and his wacky friends. So, check us out, dkvine.com/Patreon, and your patronage is thanked. Also, be sure to follow DK Vine throughout the next month and a half on social media. We are, of course, on Twitter and Facebook, which I run. Joe Mudd runs the Instagram page. And I update the social media on a daily basis. So you're always going to get content coming into your feed about the DKU. The Facebook page recently just turned 10 years old. So that's a depressing barometer of time right there. But yeah, check us out on social media. Be sure to give us a follow. And yeah, also be sure to check out our Twitch channel, our YouTube channel. And after you're done checking out dkvine.com, which is just our main website, be sure to check out Rare Gamer. Steve, talk to me about Rare Gamer.
So Rare Gamer is, believe it or not, an even bigger waste of time than DK Vine is because it just documents a lot wider of a spectrum of Rare's history. Yeah, it's www.raregamer.co.uk. If you visit our main site, you'll see all our news, our top fives, everything on the main page. But if you click on Rarer Archives, that little link on the side, we have a broken down version just to all of Rare's games they've made since the Ultimate days. You got NES, N64, just everything. You can view old interviews, music, videos, just it goes forever. So get lost in there. Dive into the Matrix like we're diving into the Matrix with this Stop and Swap discussion. You can find just everything there that I've, dedicated my sad life to over the years.
Yeah, so Paul Machacek, the architect of Stop and Swap, made a joke about the Matrix on Twitter after I announced we were doing this and said we were stuck in a loop. He said it was just like the Matrix. And then you did a photoshopped image of the whole red pill, blue pill thing, only with Morpheus holding the question mark eggs from the aforementioned Stop and Swap. And then I made the realization that, oh my God, Neo contains the source code of the Matrix, and he's been unplugged from the Matrix, and he has to return to the source. Neo is Stop and Swap. The whole Matrix trilogy is hot swapping.
Yeah, that's literally the only interpretation that you can grab from that series of film, by the way. There's nothing, Plato, allegory, the cave, screw that. It's all about Banjo-Kazooie.
An allegory for the trans experience. I realize the Matrix doesn't actually mean anything about Stop and Swap, but I'm just saying, if you wanted to add one more layer to it, then yes, you could. So I was just like, holy shit, Neo, Keanu Reeves is basically a Banjo-Kazooie cartridge. That's awesome. With googly eyes. So this isn't going to be the complete history of Stop and Swap. If you want the history of Stop, we did that. That went live this past January. Go to thekongversation.com or pull us up on iTunes or YouTube or SoundCloud or however you listen to us. If you want the complete history of Stop and Swap, listen to that episode first. However, I feel like we need to do a quick summary of what Stop and Swap is, just, to give people a helping hand. I don't want to be a bad host here. And I feel like Stop and Swap is a well-worn, well-known concept for those of us who live and breathe the rare life. But if you're just strolling into this, if you're a casual Donkey Kong fanatic and this is your first Kongversation episode, they're like, wait, why are you talking about Banjo-Kazooie? Why are you talking about Perfect Dark? Where's the Donkey Kong discussion? Steve, how does Stop and Swap relate? First of all, Banjo-Kazooie is a Donkey Kong spinoff. Don't come at me with that devilry. But, Steve, how does Stop and Swap relate to everything? How is it the grand unifying theory of Rare's N64 era? What is it?
All right, so let's squeeze 3 hours of discussion into like a little 30-second synopsis. So, Stop and Swap was something that Rare tried back in the late 90s with their video game Banjo-Kazooie, where you could take out a cartridge as it was playing, swap it with another one, and just by virtue of owning both, you could unlock rewards in either copy. So, initially, it was pitched as, you can use this with Banjo-Kazooie and then use it with Banjo-Tooie, and those two games will communicate with each other. But then as time went on, we discovered, they actually had this grand unifying plan, not only for the Banjo series, but to include Donkey Kong 64, and then to go on from there to pretty much their entire Rare library after 1998.
Yes, essentially, yeah. So, and we talked about all of that on the last episode. Like, that isn't really new knowledge, especially the fact that it was kind of unknown to the broader public. Everybody knows, or everybody who's played Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie knows those games were supposed to connect, and you were supposed to, originally swap data back and forth, like the ice key and the question mark eggs. But it's less known that Donkey Kong 64 was also going to be included in that. And then it's even lesser known that other games like Perfect Dark were being bandied about as being part of it. We just didn't realize how deep it went. So, 2 days. It was 2 days after the last episode where we discussed Stop and Swap went up. Paul Machacek, who's still at Rare today, the architect of the Stop and Swap concept, I guess the episode spurred him to reveal more details. Like, he had been wanting to do it for a while. Then he saw we did an episode about Stop and Swap, and he said, all right, here's a 7-part Twitter thread about Stop and Swap. And this sent us deeper into the well, where it gets dirtier. And we got muck, we got leeches hanging off of us, bad rash, but it included confirmation on their ideas for Stop and Swap, deeper dives into how it would work, and also we got an exact date and reason why Stop and Swap was killed dead. So this is all very fascinating to me. Like, off the top of your head, Steve, what did you glean from that Paul Machacek revelatory Twitter chain that really took you back?
I think just receiving the email itself, like an internal document of, oh, here it is. And he just threw it out like he was just tweeting about lunch. You know what I mean? Like, that's the beauty of Twitter. Before, we would rely kind of on Rareware or Scribes to kind of get that inside look. And you'd be lucky if Lee, between this brilliant satire and humor that he's doing, he just kind of mentioned this, fact about, oh yeah, and here's what we did in Banjo. And you go, oh my God, that's amazing. So to see an actual internal memo from Paul just being like, yeah, I was digging through the archives. Hey, you interested in this? And just this holy grail of information, like literally the Rosetta Stone to Stop and Swap's cancellation. It just blew me away.
Yeah, you called it an email. It looks like it's a fax. And let me explain to you, young baby Steve McCorkell, what a fax is. Before emails, faxes were how corporations and very important people communicated documents from a long distance. Through the telephone line, they would be able to scan documents and send them across far and wide, across the oceans even. And I've never used a fax machine, right? Because why would I? But I can recognize the stamp across the top, I think, as a fax. It definitely looks like a fax. You got those lines on it that you just don't see today. It made me nostalgic for like when my dad would have to fax something, and I don't even know why my dad had to fax anything. He was a refrigeration repairman. Like so why are you faxing anything, Dad? Anyway, this fax is stamped October 1st, 1999, 6:29 p.m. Somebody was there after 5 o'clock. They weren't happy about this situation. Yeah, they were not happy about this situation. They were, can we look up what day of the week October 1st? I'm going to look it up right now because I'm curious exactly like when this happened. So let me look up a 1999 calendar.
Right. While you do that too, by the way, I'm just gonna sneak in here. I'm not as such a baby as you presume me to be. I know about fax machines, and that's because of Back to the Future Part 2, because that was still the way they communicated back and forth in that universe. So even though old Biff didn't get his way, we still have that knowledge that faxes should be used to fire McFly.
Yeah. In October 2015. They still use fax machines in Hill Valley, California. October 1st, 1999 was a Friday. So not only was someone there after 5 o'clock trying to deal with this fire that Rare had set, but they were there on a Friday. Like, they were not happy about this. TGIF, not for this anonymous director of technical support at Nintendo of America. So Paul did Sharpie out the name under that the letter was signed. I tried to do research into who this would have been, who the director of technical support at Nintendo of America was in October 1999. I came up with I came up with Bup because, well, look, as a Donkey Kong journalist, as the world's preeminent Donkey Kong journalist, given that I made up the decision and I'm the only one who carries the title, I had to find out. And I did probably 2 hours of digging on this, and I came up with nothing. And I was like, at the end of the day, I probably shouldn't dox this person who was just doing their job. Like, I don't want to blame this anonymous director of technical support for killing Stop N Swop, because they were just going along with what their bosses wanted. And granted, just following orders has usually not been a great defense throughout history. But in this case, I do get it. It's just,
Yeah.
It's a shame. But
being released on the same year as Office Space as well, I'd like to think that this technical director was kind of a lumber type anyway. So he kind of strolled over and went, hey, what's happening? I'm going to have to ask you to go ahead and cancel Stop N Swop. I think that's probably how it all went down initially.
So this fax is from Nintendo of America, addressed to Chris Stamper at Rare Limited. So, this wasn't sent to Paul Machacek. This was sent right to
the top,
the head honcho. Yeah. We always, knew Nintendo had a problem with Stop N Swop, right? Like, this is something that Rare came up with, and basically Banjo-Kazooie shipped, announcing that it would connect to Banjo-Tooie in some fantastical way. They didn't get into hot swapping in Banjo-Kazooie. And in fact, the term Stop N Swop wasn't known at the time. So the general audience had no understanding of how this was going to work. A lot of us just, being naive children who only knew what we had seen before, assumed it was going to be some sort of lock-on cartridge a la Sonic and Knuckles. We didn't even, regard the fact that Nintendo wouldn't have invested that much capital into a special N64 cartridge for this one game, for this one experience. That isn't Nintendo's style. Nintendo likes to waste their money in pointless peripherals and accessories for systems that maybe 2 games use, and then they just collect dust for the rest of the time.
You want the company that had the foresight enough to have Virtual Boy being a thing as your leading principle.
Hey, Steve, I will not have you on my podcast and disparage the good name of the Virtual Boy. You apologize, sir. We are a pro Virtual Boy family here at DK5.
Well, fine. I'll forgive you for that, but Wii U we need to talk about.
The Wii U had some good games. It was just shit branding, and also the gamepad was very hard to hold. I'm thinking more along the lines of, I don't know, the DK Bongos, but not even the DK Bongos. Do you remember the GameCube mic? Do you remember that little microphone that you had to blow in? Do you remember the microphone?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, stuff like that. What? Even the Labo, the Labo, really, Nintendo? Yeah, I guess it's a cool idea, but just because you can do it, should you have done it? Because now, the Labo's basically dead, and it's just well, that was good, I guess. My point being, Nintendo hit gold early on with the light gun, the NES Zapper, and then they were just this is what we need to be for the rest of time. We need to develop toys that go along with our consoles. And I say that as somebody who had the NES Power Pad, all right? So, and I used the Power Pad. I would break that out every so often and be I'm gonna do this track meet on my Nintendo Entertainment System.
So just to clarify here, you don't have an issue with Virtual Boy at all, but so if the Labo gave you headaches, would you like that more, or?
Well, the Virtual Boy didn't give me headaches because I took the automatic pause breaks as it recommended. I like the Virtual Boy because I felt like it was an immersive experience that really boosted a certain aesthetic, specifically for sci-fi games set in space or fantasy games set in another realm, in a magical realm. I really, really like a lot of the Virtual Boy games. Granted, there's only a dozen of them, and when I say I really like a lot of them, probably only half of that. But the potential, Steve, that the Virtual Boy had. If only we had gotten a Donkey Kong game for it. Anyway, so
down the wrong rabbit hole with this one. I think we need to find Stop N Swapping.
Yeah, we'll have a point counterpoint episode on the Virtual Boy if you want to come back for that. But let me read this letter verbatim.
Okay.
So this is, for context, again, October 1st, 1999. This would be 10 days before Jet Force Gemini was released. That was a game self-published by Rare. But remember, Nintendo also had a stake in Rare at this time. So even though something was self-published by Rare and ostensibly owned by Rare, it's like Nintendo still had some investment in that. So 10 days before Jet Force Gemini was released, and also about a month and 3 weeks before Donkey Kong 64 was released. This letter is about Donkey Kong 64. And it's funny because Nintendo of Japan had a hand in this letter too. They were freaking out probably, and they probably had to get Nintendo of America involved as their middleman executioner here. All right. I am writing you regarding the Stop N Swop in Donkey Kong 64. While we respect the creativity of this feature, after testing and discussing this feature with the R&D 3 and, what is that? And the
Uji plant?
Uji plant? Yeah, Uji. We must ask that you remove this feature from Donkey Kong 64. Nintendo has a number of issues with the way in which this feature has been implemented. And then we got 3 bullet points here. So, there is no way that we can guarantee that the RD RAM will retain data long enough in all current and future version of the N64 console for this feature to work. There is also a risk of damage to both the console and the game pack should the swap be made while power is still on. However unlikely, there is a chance that a consumer who has exchanged game packs with the power on will experience a latch-up condition in a chip, which could cause overheating and potential consumer safety problems. So basically, your house will burn down because you wanted to put the ice key in Donkey Kong 64.
It's just a risk you have to take.
Right. I mean, I would take that risk in a heartbeat. I would take that risk today.
Yeah. I would do it one time and then come back to it the second time and just debate it a little bit and go, nah, the ice key's worth it. Let's try again.
Yeah. In spite of the fact that these bonuses are not necessary to complete either game, we feel that it must work reliably on all N64 consoles. Given the limited time remaining in the schedule, we cannot thoroughly examine all of the potential conflicts and solutions. We would like to suggest that you find alternative method of achieving the bonuses in both Banjo and Donkey Kong. Perhaps it is, there are some typos in this, so if it sounds like I'm having a stroke.
Very frantically at 6:29, we get it.
This is after 6 o'clock on a Friday. Tempers are probably, frayed at this point. Perhaps would be possible to reveal passcode in DK64, which could be used to open the locked area in Banjo. Correspondingly, subsequent visits to the game pack in DK64 could produce the ice key by asking a player some question about their experience playing the new area in Banjo, such as, which item did you find with my special code in Banjo-Kazooie? Banana? Ice key? Golden note? Etc. The balance of DK64, including the different ending, could then remain accessible only to those who played through the new area in Banjo. I believe a solution such as this will preserve some of the benefit of tying the two games together and have minimal impact to the code, testing, and ultimately the remaining schedule. After you have had a chance to confer with the team, please let us know how you'll resolve the issue and what, if any, impact it may have on the schedule. Lastly, should you wish to implement other such unique features in the future, please contact me directly so that we can completely research the ramifications when we have time in the schedule to allow us to be more flexible. Sincerely, Sharpie Blob, Director of Technical Support.
Do you think maybe there was an issue with time in the schedule at this point? I don't know if they made that too clear.
You think Rare playing with fire with the biggest holiday release of Nintendo's 1999 year really like had people freaked out behind the scenes at all? A
Yeah,
little bit?
maybe. I mean, it's hinted.
Because, you have to keep in mind, too, like, over at Rare, they were scrambling to get Donkey Kong 64 done. As I mentioned before on this podcast, it was all hands on deck. They had people like Chris Seaver working on Donkey Kong 64 in order to get it out the door. DK64 already had a pretty fraught development cycle, and Nintendo was like relying on it, and it's not like they could just switch it out with Diddy Kong Racing 2 or whatever, however they made Banjo-Kazooie work, 2 years earlier. Wasn't going to work this time. Nintendo had nothing else. Rare had nothing else ready to go. They needed to get it out the door. And video game magazines at the time were also furious. The older skewing video game magazines, because Perfect Dark was delayed because they had to pool resources into DK64 to get it done. So Perfect Dark's development time was slowed down. And I remember it might have been EGM or Game Pro or one of those magazines. They were really salty about how Donkey Kong 64 was depriving them of their pseudo GoldenEye sequel. So, anyway, so Rare was trying to get DK64 out the door. Nintendo was counting on it. And meanwhile, about, a month and 3 weeks before the game was set to be released, not shipped, right? Not mass produced, released. Nintendo realizes they have, this potential like nuke sitting in all of the, 2B cartridges that could potentially cause all sorts of litigation and consumer problems. And first of all, I just want to say, in Rare's defense, I would have done the exact same thing. I give them all the props in the world for not asking for permission about this and just doing it and hoping that once Nintendo sees their ingenious vision, that they will just go on board with it, right? Like, this is the kind of thing that you have to do to get anything done in the corporate world. This is why I bristle under authority. This is why I had to become a Donkey Kong journalist, because I only worked well with myself. So, now, rewind a bit. Nintendo knew something was up when Banjo-Kazooie was released, right? Because they realized that it was like constantly like scanning for what was it again? It was something about like Nintendo caught on that the Banjo-Kazooie cartridges were always scanning for is it RAM or I don't know, but
yeah, it was an address written in memory specifically for Stop and Swap. I think Paul said it was an 8-byte integer that was just basically like refreshing every so often, going stop and swap items, no. Stop and swap items, no. And when it said yes, it would change stuff in the game. But it was searching for those 8 digits, and it couldn't find them, obviously. So it kept on, almost like we're doing. We're caught in a loop. So it was doing that over and over again, and they were kind of curious, like, what is this doing here? But apparently it didn't impact it enough for them to go, hey, you can't have this. You got to go back to, testing or whatever and fix it. So they knew about it at that point, that it was doing something peculiar, but they let it ship anyway. It wasn't impacting any of the feature set of the game. Yeah,
I think it like freaked Nintendo out a little bit, and I assume they told Rare, like, hey, if there's a feature, like, remove it, and they didn't, and I don't know, but and they just pressed forward with the plans for it, including this ambitious like 6-game unifying theory, as we called it, of Rare. And the second game maybe the second game that it would have utilized would have been Donkey Kong 64. And so, yeah, let me just say, like, right when Paul tweeted this fax, my jaw dropped, because there's so much to surmise from this. Not just the surface level, hey, Stop and Swap is fucking canceled, go home. but just like reading between the lines, especially the last paragraph where they say, "Never do this again." Essentially, like I was rolling on the floor nearly from laughter and also cringing. It's like that like Office style humor where you're just, it's like hilarious, but you also want to die inside because it's just so awkward. I saved this fax immediately, and I made sure, like, no, this is a precious document. If Paul decides, hey, maybe I shouldn't have shared that, too late. I've got it. Yeah, it's mine now, because this deserves to be in the inevitable Donkey Kong Universe Museum. Granted, I don't have the original copy, but still, this is going to be one of those art forgeries that I hang on the wall. It's like, no, it's the original one. You get the sense, too, that, like, by this point in the Rare Nintendo partnership, like, Nintendo is just, like, not getting exhausted, maybe, but it's definitely, like, getting a little bit exasperated that this major studio who is working so intimately with them was so far out of their purview that they were pulling stuff like this. Like, because Nintendo does not operate in this capacity today. Like, even studios that are, like, Western studios removed from their traditional structure are much more tightly kept in their grasp. Like, look at Retro Studios. Retro is basically, overseen by somebody from Nintendo at all times. Tanabe, what was famously like their parental guardian sent from Nintendo. So much so that they bristled a little bit under his authority, allegedly, although they're now working together again for Metroid Prime 4. But this whole situation with Rare hasn't been repeated since. And I have to wonder if situations like this played a part in it. And, I'm the biggest Rare fan, present company excluded, but, I am one of the biggest Rare advocates to this day, as are you, and I just have to kind of smirk because, yeah, this just seems about right. Like, especially Rare of this era, where they're a lot more buttoned up and they play by the rules today, but they were really the troublemakers of the Nintendo family back then.
It kind of has changed. It's a shift in game development, and even, other mediums that you do. You can look at Disney for a great example. There's a lot more quality control as the product's being made, like the meetings back then for something like Banjo were probably high, there'd probably be like 16 meetings that you'd have with Nintendo, but I imagine if it's made today, there'd probably be somewhere closer to like 300, even tiny meetings that don't have the core staff in it, just periphery stuff discussing it, because you're trying to eliminate anything that could possibly go wrong, so you don't have emails like this in the 11th hour going, hey, we need to remove a big part of the game a month before it's out. You know what I mean? Like, this is a perfect example of, like, an oh shit moment where somebody's leapt up and gone, this isn't going to work. We need to let them know. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Like, it's just, it shouldn't have gotten to this point kind of thing. But you can't fault Nintendo or Rare. Like, Rare is the geniuses that they are to put something like Stop and Swap together. It requires a lot of innovation, not a whole lot of legalese, you know what I mean? So that's where Nintendo stepped in and said, okay, we're going to have to snuff this out because this could cause a lot of problems. And unfortunately, at that stage, like it says, Rare trying to come up with a solution to this outside of Stop and Swap was, there wasn't enough time to properly do something like that. So in the end, even though Nintendo did offer some possible solutions, and we can break those down in time of, effectiveness, but they decided, hey, it's best that we just put this to rest because it's not the intended vision that we had. And Banjo's all ready, but it'll be the only game in our, septillion series of these 6 unifying theory that's actually going to be prepped and ready for Stop and Swap.
Yeah. And like I said, I don't blame anybody in this situation. And I wasn't also actually making a one-to-one case that this is why Nintendo is so regimented today. Obviously, the industry has evolved. Obviously, game development has evolved, and there's a lot higher stakes, a lot more capital being pumped into everything. But it is you kind of sense the frustration here. It's like this major Japanese gaming company is using their American subsidiary to rein in this rogue UK studio. Like, it's just this international game of oh shit at the 11th hour. And I think the fact that this was on a Friday after 5 o'clock says a lot. So, because also, like, granted, maybe the timestamp is it's American dating, so I don't know. I was going to say maybe it's only after like 5 o'clock in the UK, but no, it's American dating. So I would imagine this was like that would have put it on the Pacific coast. So 8 hours difference here. So this would have been like after midnight they got this fax. And so they might not have even seen it until like Monday. But anyway, I'm just speculating. Maybe they were working all weekend trying to get DK64 done. But yeah, like there's a lot about DK64, that I critique, but I never felt like it was missing any core component like the ice key. Like, they hid the evidence well.
Yeah.
It's when you play the game, assuming you're not like looking at code and trying to like suss out any stuff that was removed, you have no indication that the ice key was ever going to factor into DK64.
Yeah.
And so, like, they even removed the Banjo-Kazooie refrigerator freezer thing in Donkey Kong's Treehouse. So, like, they didn't leave any trace. So that's why this is so, like, it's so mind-boggling for people to even accept that DK64 would have utilized the ice key, because there's just nothing in the actual game as presented officially to tip the hat to that. So they did do a good job cleaning it up over that 7-week period, less than 7 weeks by the time the game had to be shipped and mass produced. But the suggestions that Nintendo made to make it work, I sort of like them. I sort of like them. They're a little bit boring and they're a little bit basic, but I've often said I wish Rare would have come up with a more inventive solution in Banjo-Tooie to pay off Stop and Swap. If you couldn't actually connect back to Banjo-Kazooie, it felt very deflating the way they did it, almost like it was just an afterthought. But we know now that they had a year and some change to come up with something, because this October 1st is when Stop and Swap effectively died. So, like I always said, it would have been nice to be able to like have those areas from Banjo-Kazooie at the very least recreated inside Tooie, so you still get the thrill of going inside Shark Food Island or inside the Ice Key Chamber, even if you're not actually inside Banjo-Kazooie when you do it. And that's just my fanboy, wish list. I'm not saying like it would have been a practical thing. They did it probably the most practical way they could have done it, but it wasn't satisfying. And at least the way Nintendo suggests these things, it could have been a little bit more satisfying. I don't know. It would have been neat to see DK64 use the ice key, but I think at this point, they had only promised it for Banjo-Tooie, so I can see why they just completely ignored these suggestions and said, you know what, we're just not going to have it even referenced in DK64. Yeah, the passcode idea. So if they would have revealed passcode in DK64, like the treasure, I guess the sandcastle codes, right? Then you still have the problem of, well, now you've got the items, or at least the ice key in Banjo-Kazooie, but like then it feels very much like a farce then, because you've got it in Banjo-Kazooie, but then what do you do with it? You can't do anything with it. So I don't know.
The problem too with using a passcode idea is that Stop and Swap was kind of made to, contact this problem of how do we transfer items, I mean, peripherally or not, but how do we use that so these, secrets and cheats aren't spilled onto the internet and people can just look them up? They wanted a way that you could have it concrete. And using a passcode completely defeats the purpose of that. Because now you've got the same problem of, well, why doesn't somebody just rush the internet and go, Donkey Kong 64, Ice Key, how to? And there's going to be a whole guide on the internet going, oh yeah, you talk to this character and you say that, oh, it's the special code here. Or you just grab the code in full and just put that in Banjo-Kazooie. So it really defeats the entire purpose. And especially with the idea that he had where you ask a player about their experience going, which item did you find with my special code in Banjo-Kazooie? I mean, that's clearly just going to be leaked online where they just go, hey, answer this question, you'll get it. And also, too, not even to mention the fact that, I mean, you pose that question to the player, and let's say they get it wrong. Are they locked out of that now? Do they have a second try at it? You know what I mean? Like, if you answer the wrong thing, you've locked your game, essentially. So you either have to delete your file, or if you get a second try, they go, oh, we're not going to be unfair. Sure, maybe you guess Golden Banana, you go, oh, that's wrong. Well, then what's the point of having that gate there anyway? Because then they can just guess again. So now it's just a guessing game. So I can see Rare looking at these suggestions going, nah, it's not going to work. That one's not going to work either. And they just had to face facts and go, look, Stop and Swap, as we intended it, is not going to be made. We don't like these compromise suggestions. Take it out of DK64. We'll see if maybe we can do something with Banjo-Tooie. And then because their hands were really tied on that promise, they said, look, we're not going to have Stop and Swap functional from Banjo-Kazooie to Banjo-Tooie. We are going to still offer the items. They're still going to offer bonuses. That idea is still intact, but the technical way that these two games are going to communicate with each other are not going to exist as we intended them. It's going to be a compromise. The players will still get their items, and people will forget about it in a year, so who cares? And then we kept it up for 20, and they went, you guys, get a life. Jesus, there's a world out there that you can experience and run through the grass and find love. And we're like, no, we're going to obsess over this mystery for 20 years after the Nintendo 64 is even relevant. So, it's how it works.
It is. And like I said, I was comparing it more to the way Stop and Swap was resolved in Banjo-Tooie originally. More so than it actually being like a really decent idea, because you're right, especially with the, internet rising in prominence, and being in more and more households, the secret would have been out there. So it does defeat the purpose. And again, it just points to Stop and Swap being pretty much ahead of its time in the concept. It's basically just Rare outpacing and outthinking the hardware and the limitations thereof, where now, we deal with Stop and Swap level stuff all the time, as we brought up in the last episode. Sea of Thieves has had basically Stop and Swap with the new Battletoads. It's just not as viscerally as exciting, because it's just, you play this, you unlock this. There's not that level of, oh my god, I am interacting with this physical game cartridge. Donkey Kong and Banjo are like jumping over. It's what made Pokemon, to me, such a thrilling concept back in 1998. More thrilling than it seems now. And granted, we've lived with Pokemon for, nearly over 20 years, nearing 25 years. But, for me, when everything's digital and digital devices just communicate with each other, yeah, great. Stuff like this is plausible and feasible, and it happens all the time. But there is something amazing about getting to fight your Pokemon on one cartridge with your friend's cartridge, or even trading it. It really felt magical. And that's what Stop and Swap was. And that's why it still entices us to this day, even though we've had Stop and Swap in the XBLA versions even, and Nuts and Bolts. The original concept is so magical because it feels like you're breaking the boundaries of reality itself. You're the digital world is crossing over with the physical world, and it really just felt like there were no boundaries. That's why, it's this particular iteration of Stop and Swap is and will always be more enticing than anything we might see today. But that being said, they also mentioned the secret ending to Donkey Kong 64. And so a lot like this is really what like got people's juices flowing. Apologies if that's gross. I don't even know. This is really what got people excited back when Paul did this tweet thread, the 7-parter on Twitter. Because what do you mean a secret ending in Donkey Kong 64 that the Ice Key would have utilized? Thinking about it rationally, it probably means that audition sequence where Cranky auditions characters for the Donkey Kong game on the Dolphin, aka the GameCube, which would ultimately be Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, which would mean that Cranky Kong basically rejected every audition and just decided to recast everyone sans Donkey Kong. But I can't think of any other secret ending, especially if there was only 7 weeks between this fax and the release of the game. Surely that's the secret ending, and the Ice Key would have just factored into the 101% completion score. I don't know, but I would imagine that like they just removed the Ice Key and then they lowered the threshold for how to get the secret ending to just things actually contained within DK64. That's my best guess. I was thinking briefly that maybe we would have gotten a stinger, like Bottles the Mole shows up and he talks to Donkey Kong, says, "You think you're the only platforming star in the world? Your universe just got bigger." Just something, Nick Fury-esque, but probably we wouldn't have gotten any hard crossovers between the two franchises. It would have just been, you get the audition.
Yeah. Yeah, they've really scored through the entire game, but the fact that, we can find such remnants that are still on the game, like that scene in the treehouse, like the warp to Crystal Caves, I mean, that's still, as hard as it is to find, they have located that in the Ice Key text as well. So you would think that they would find at least an empty value for a new scene, like a new cutscene at the end, that would show off something. But I think you're probably right in that it was the audition scene that would have been there, and we could have had maybe Banjo show up during the audition just to kind of tease it there. But once they took Stop and Swap out, they went, all right, let's remove all reference. We'll just have it strictly a Donkey Kong 64 related family kind of thing. So
yeah, although if Banjo and Kazooie had shown up and they cut it, I found out about it, I would never forgive them. Honestly, yeah, that would hurt almost as much as losing Donkey Kong Racing still hurts to this day. So, well, the other major point of discussion, this is all kind of dredged up, Steve.
Oh, yeah.
Is the identity of the six. I feel like this is Battlestar Galactica, like who are the six Cylons? But the six Rare N64 games. Because obviously, so Banjo-Kazooie is counted among the six. It isn't just like 6 games after Banjo-Kazooie. No, Banjo-Kazooie is the first game of the 6. Banjo-Tooie obviously would have been, I guess, the final planned game of the 6. Donkey Kong 64, we already knew. That's the third one. After this, we knew about Perfect Dark. That was bandied about. We had known about it because it just sounded weird, right? Because all of the, like, Donkey Kong interacting with Banjo makes sense from a couple standpoints, given that the close connection the two franchises share, even to the point where you can argue that Banjo is a Donkey Kong spin-off. They're forever related, so of course it would make sense for them to cross over. Perfect Dark's a little bit weirder because aside from being, a Rare game, there's not a lot of connection between the world of Joanna Dark and Banjo and Donkey Kong.
Yeah, well, there's two things really that separate it, because first of all, it looks like Stop and Swap was the kind of adventure. Paul points out the adventure games, like the mascot platformers that they were making back in the day. That would be the kind of focus on it. But not only that, Perfect Dark is rated M. So you're potentially cutting off a portion of your audience that won't be able to use Stop and Swap in that game, because they're too young for it, obviously. So, it is kind of the outlier where you go, okay, Perfect Dark. That's like, I like the fact that it's in there, but it is an interesting choice to go, okay, we're doing Perfect Dark in combination with Banjo and Donkey Kong. It is the outlier.
Yeah, no, I don't think Stop and Swap would have ever been an advertised feature. Like, you wouldn't have seen, like, on the back of the Perfect Dark box, bring over the beige question mark egg from Banjo-Kazooie into Perfect Dark to unlock. I don't think any of the question mark eggs would have been utilized with do we have any clarification on exactly what items would have been brought over, or would have just been passing around the ice key?
So the ice key would have been the grand finale of the whole thing, where you'd come back and you'd be able to use that in Banjo-Kazooie. But the eggs were created so kind of vague, the fact they were just Easter eggs with question marks on them, because it could fit with any of the games. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the fact there. In terms of what they would do, like which went to specific games, they never got that far, unfortunately, from what I was gathering from the interview with Paul. So like he said specifically, it's not like we had the blue Stop and Swap egg is going to go to this one and then the red's going to go to that one. Like they never got quite that far with it, but there's got to be some kind of design document, not to say which went to where, but like how the eggs would have been like utilized in the games and how you would have gone from one area to another. Because there's got to be, especially with Donkey Kong 64, we can see the inkling of like, okay, we're going to set up this secret area that you're not going to be able to get to, just like Shark Food Island, just like the Desert Door, just like the Barrel. And by virtue of having Stop and Swap functional and working, you can go to these areas in the future, and now, it's unlocked and you can explore it, And for a 3D platformer, especially like in that collectathon genre, you want to be able to explore. Being gated off and told, no, not yet, or you don't have permission, you're like, no, that's the whole point, is I go everywhere here, So it had that kind of intrigue to it. But yeah, they were vague on purpose enough to be like, this will fit with any genre, with any rating, with any game that we put it in. It'll feel like it's natural because it is a mystery egg.
Now, when you say the ice key was the grand finale, it was going to be used in the second game in the cycle with Donkey Kong 64. So how would it have been the grand finale?
I'm just trying to find here. I've got my interview popped up with Paul. Yeah, let me just see, because I believe he mentioned that it was going to come full circle specifically with the ice key. And it could have been that the ice key was passed over to the 6 games, being the only item that was truant, because the other one, if you have a mystery egg, you assume, okay, let's say, for instance, Banjo passes a yellow egg to Perfect Dark. Well, Perfect Dark now has that yellow egg, it gets the reward, and maybe passes it back. But the ice key could have been that item that gets passed from Donkey Kong 64 and then gradually to the other 5 games. And then once it has that value of, okay, it's been passed to Perfect Dark, it comes right back again. And that's how you unlock it in Banjo-Kazooie.
Wow. Yeah, that so basically, yeah, you're right. You might have had to have gotten the M-rated Perfect Dark in order to build up your ice key to the point where it's now usable in Banjo-Tooie. Which would have upset a few families out there probably. But all right. So we've got those 4 games locked down. It's the identity of the last 2.
I just have the quote here just for a second.
Sure.
Paul's talking about it. He goes, we had a picture of 6 games in our mind that could be linked. I suggested, wouldn't it be great if we could go full circle, and if a player got all 6 and we sent triggers sequentially between them, then the last game could send a super code back to the first. That may have been why the ice key replaced an egg for Banjo-Kazooie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well.
Sorry to derail it a little.
That's all right. The final 2 games, though, this is where people can't seem to agree. And I feel like 12 Tales Conquer 64 would have definitely been in that chain.
Right.
Especially when you look at Banjo and Donkey Kong Connect. So Conquer, obviously the other big platformer they were working on at the time, already has a pre-existing connection to Donkey Kong. Of course it would be Conquer. And I think that would make a lot of sense in this time frame that Conquer would have been earmarked to use Stop and Swap. Now, Paul said that Jet Force was going to be included. He thought Jet Force. He didn't say for sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are running with that. The Jet Force Gemini was going to be the 6th game. My issue with that is that Jet Force Gemini came out 10 days after this fax was sent from Nintendo to Rare,
Yeah.
there would have not been any time to remove any Stop and Swap features in Jet Force Gemini, at least that initial wave of cartridges, because they would have already been manufactured. They would have already been on their way to release. So if Jet Force Gemini was the 6th game, or in this case, the 2nd game, we would know because there would be Stop and Swap functionality in at least the first wave of releases, right?
That is true. Jet Force Gemini is kind of an overlooked game where we kind of, it's a hidden gem for the N64. So if there is, and it's hiding on there, like Cutting Room Floor has done this really great kind of deep dive into data mining for the game. But it's one of those games we don't have enough information, I think, to, fully prove 100% that no, this does not have any Stop and Swap functionality, because we're still finding stuff in DK64, and that game has been combed over, for years. So I don't want to say 100% certainty that it's inconclusive right now. I'm going to say it's still open, but I do agree that there's not enough time from the note being released, the fax, as it were, and the point where Jet Force Gemini was shipping, that there would be remnants. You know what I mean? Like, it's too late at that point.
My thinking is, yes, Jet Force Gemini was self-published by Rare. It was one of their own games, and Nintendo probably wouldn't have been as hypercritical of it as they were Donkey Kong 64, but Nintendo still had a stake in Rare. They still didn't want people hot swapping cartridges. If there was anything in Jet Force Gemini whatsoever that would have flagged this situation, they would have already been through this before this fax was sent. So that being said, has anybody actually tested it out? Has anybody hot swapped Jet Force with Banjo? Could it be that it actually does work and nobody has thought to try it? I don't know. Like,
problem with it too is you'd have to go very scrutinizing, and like having the Stop and Swap items in Banjo-Kazooie by virtue alone is all that Jet Force Gemini should need to see. So if somebody did a 1-by-1 parallel play, like you hook up 2 different TVs, you put in 2 copies of Jet Force, one that was swapped with Banjo and one that's just playing, and you tried to kind of see if there was any differences, that would be the way that you could do it there. But like you said, at this point, I think it's too obvious where it's like there should be, text left over or something like that, something that we can actually see where it's intended to. But if you look deep in the memory and see if anything was changed by the swapping, that would be our first clue to go off. But like you said, I think it's too far gone where Jet Force isn't possible. So what game do you think then would have taken it?
Well, yeah, as Paul himself cops to, it's been 20 years or more than 20 years, so his memory isn't what it was considering the situation. It's still a really, really comprehensive look at Stop and Swap, but even he admits that he can't remember all the finer details. Maybe Jet Force was being bandied about as utilizing it, and then they decided, no, let's kick the can down the road a bit and have Donkey Kong 64 be the big game that keeps it going, the second game in the chain. My thinking was the only other game that makes sense then would be Dinosaur Planet.
Yeah, true enough. I think it shares some of the team members too.
Yeah, Dinosaur Planet was in development at this time. It started life as a Timber the Tiger game that gradually evolved until it was a Star Fox sequel. But it's still that kind of evolution from Timber the Tiger, to Fox McCloud. You can still see the DNA of it being a Diddy Kong Racing follow-up, right down to Tricky being in the game. But my thinking is, Dinosaur Planet would make the most sense if Jet Force is to be excluded. And honestly, then it would be Banjo, both Banjo games, Donkey Kong 64, Conquer, Dinosaur Planet. That makes Perfect Dark the weird one, the odd one out, because 5 out of those 6 games are DKU today. I mean, granted, 12 Tales Conquer 64 became Conquer's Bad Fur Day. Dinosaur Planet became Star Fox Adventures, but they are still DKU. Perfect Dark is the only one we don't consider DKU. Although this situation might have changed that had it been incorporated into a working Stop and Swap. I don't know. But yeah, Dinosaur Planet makes the most sense to me as someone who lives and breathes this stuff and is looking at the release date of Jet Force and the fact that no Stop and Swap features have ever been uncovered in Jet Force Gemini. And especially in the few months since Paul revealed all of this, you would think people would be going back into Jet Force and really like digging into it. So yeah, I'm going to say Dinosaur Planet is my best educated guess, but it's still just a guess because I wasn't there. You weren't there. Paul's memory isn't what it used to be. So, you know, it could be Jet Force and it could just be a weird bit of circumstance where they were able, like, there's no way they could have removed anything. Like I said, it would have been ready to go at that point. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think if there were any other like N64 era rare games that like got punted, but I can't think of any. Like that would have been the complete lineup.
Yeah.
Unless it was like Mickey's Speedway or something.
Yeah, the problem with that, I don't think that would have been included just because it's a Disney kind of exclusive thing. So it would have been kind of a periphery team dealing with that one, and I don't think it would have been kind of brought into the fold. You know, just
well, yeah, it's not even really considered part of like the rare N64 family, like back in the day, and people are gonna give me shit for this. all the Disney fanatics, like listening to this are gonna give me shit. But even back in the late 90s, those of us who were big rare fans clearly saw how little they were like Rare themselves were talking up the Mickey games that they were developing.
Well, was that from a legal side of things though? Because I remember there was an issue there where they couldn't really set up a section of the website. It had to be through Disney. So I think there was a whole lot more oversight from Disney looking at that game. Probably to the point where it's like similar in game development today. If you go to work for Disney, you know, you got 17 lawyers and 3 producers that have to check in all the time, you know?
Sure. Yeah, but like Rare talked about it and acknowledged they did it, but it still didn't feel like it was part of the family, if that makes any sense. It was very much this remote thing that there's like, oh, you're also doing that. Okay, so to the point where I even forget about those games when I'm looking back at like their output during this time. I'm like, oh yeah, they also did that, but that doesn't really count, does it? I don't know. Yeah. Do you have anything you would like to add? Any theories or thoughts about the 6 or
just that the N64 library trying to plan something out this far in advance, just going, we know that we have 6 or more games in development over the years that we're going to continue developing for that idea to function, your games have to be executed from start to finish in a really specific way. And it's funny looking back on it because you go, okay, of your intended games that you tried to make it for, let's say the Dinosaur, for the sake of argument, is in it. That game never came out. That was pushed over to the GameCube, so you can't use that. 12 Tales Conquer 64 did such a 180 that it's not even recognizable as the same game. And if it was, you would have to bring that into the fold as one of the Stop and Swap titles. And then you have the same idea behind Perfect Dark being like, hey, there's M-rated titles in your Stop and Swap. You know, like this kind of goes against the ratings appeal of it. But yeah, like just seeing what they were trying to accomplish back in the late 90s, if Donkey Kong 64 had been functional, where we would have been today. It's fascinating to look back at that stuff. And it's what makes Stop and Swap so appealing too, is that you can see this idea kind of forming where they're like, we have this idea that 6 games, 6 eggs, and the ice key, they're going to be passed. It's really crazy to look at.
Yeah, and it does make you wonder that even if Nintendo somehow let Donkey Kong 64 happen.
Yeah.
And what have you. You're right. Dinosaur Planet would have still been delayed until it hit the GameCube. And so that would have been removed from the 6. Conquer probably would have been removed just because Nintendo would have freaked out about it. And at that point, like, you have to drastically change your Stop and Swap plans on the fly.
Yeah.
You don't get to utilize the full vision anyway. So what does a truncated stop and swap look like? Would it have would they have been able to carry out the full vision, or would there have been any irregularities that sprung up as a result? I don't know. But it is fascinating. We can lament all we want about how they didn't let this happen, but it couldn't have happened the way they planned it anyway, just due to the realities of game development and what happened with Dinosaur Planet and Conquer. So
if the one egg formula was the way that they, if they were unmoving on that, then yeah, it wouldn't have been able to be completed. But I feel like they would have had a Hail Mary at the end of it. They just went, yeah, and Perfect Dark has 4 for some reason, just to give that kind of notion that, okay, no, all the eggs are utilized. They would have been able to fix it at some point, looking at the remaining release schedule, being like, we don't have a whole lot of games coming out for the N64 anymore,
Yeah, quick. We need a tip-top game. We need it in 3 weeks. Let's get it out. Get it out the door. Yeah. All right. Well, we've got some calls. We got 2 calls to take from people who wanted to talk to us about Stop and Swap. So why don't we go ahead and listen to what they have to say? Here's the first call, and then we'll talk about the first call, and then we'll play the second call, and then we'll talk about that.
Sounds good.
Hello, DK Vine. It is John Tessier, a.k.a. the J-Test Express, calling into the conversation again. This time we're talking about Stop and Swap, probably my favorite topic in all of the DKU. So, back in the Disney, as a young lad, I played Banjo-Kazooie religiously, was really into the Stop and Swap thing, thought it was really cool. But it was even cooler that there was the whole mystery behind it, that it wasn't solved, and I couldn't figure out what it was all about. So, 13-year-old me or whatever it was, created a theory, and I called it Stop and Swap My 2 cents. It was a whole theory. I remember I spent the whole day working on it at school, wasn't paying attention to class, was writing out this Stop and Swap theory. And then I posted it online, only to get completely roasted, and everyone's like, no, we know what Stop and Swap is. It's been figured out for the longest time. You're an idiot. This theory makes no sense, and you're just completely dumb. So I, was upset about that, but it was true. I had this completely stupid Stop and Swap theory that made no sense, even though we had pretty much figured out what Stop and Swap was going to be at that point in time. But I looked back at my theory recently, and there were some interesting points. I won't get into the whole thing right now, but basically one of the parts was that Captain Blubber was a part of it, was somehow a part of Stop and Swap, because he's in Jolly Rogers Bay, where Captain Black Eyes is, and he's right next to the shop. He seems to want to get away in a hurry. And I thought, there was a reason for that. I thought maybe he was stealing the Stop and Swap items, and Captain Black Eyes was after him, and that's why he wanted to get away in a hurry. And there was also the fact you see him on that island at the end of Banjo-Kazooie where we first learned about Stop and Swap. So basically my question to you guys is, even though it was a dumb theory of 13-year-old me, do you guys think Captain Blubber had anything to do with Stop and Swap at any point in time? Love to hear you guys' thoughts. Can't wait for the conversation. Sounds good. Bye.
Well, thanks for the call, John. J-Test Express. Well, so I'm used to talking about Captain Black Eye in the context of Stop and Swap, and Sea of Thieves, and just general life. So this is a refreshing change of pace. We're talking about Captain Blubber. We're talking about a different pirate for once. I'll say this much, and then you can add your I was gonna say 2 cents, but sunken doubloon. You can add your sunken doubloon, Steve. No Stop and Swap theory is bad, and shame on the people who are shaming you for that. For me, the joy of Stop and Swap at this point is the unlimited potentials and what ifs. Stop and Swap is the journey, not the destination. It is looking at the totality of not just Banjo-Kazooie, but basically, any of the latter era N64 output of Rare, and just thinking, what if? what if that shrub over there had a higher purpose? What if there's something to this texture on this wall over here that signifies some grand plan? So to me, like, I don't think any theory is stupid. Now, there are some theories that are more sound than others, absolutely. But I feel like, no, take pride in it. Take joy in it. Like, this is a mystery that no matter how much we get solved over the years, no matter how much we get explained, there will always be stuff left to uncover and to speculate about. That is the enduring appeal of Stop and Swap. That is why we're doing a second Stop and Swap episode in 4 months' time. I mean, it is an endlessly fascinating topic, and I feel like it is something that we can just continue to speculate about and to continue to drum up new theories about. Do I think Captain Blubber would have ever served a purpose in Stop and Swap? Probably not. No, probably not Captain Blubber. Captain Black Eye, yes. But not Blubber. But I'll cede the floor to Steve now and see what he has to say.
Yeah. So Jolly Roger's Lagoon, just as a location for Stop and Swap hunting, it's the grassy knoll of conspiracy theory, because even looking at the landscape, you go, okay, you have Captain Blubber and his wave race higher. So, he's in proximity of Black Eye. And like you said before, the caller, you have, him appearing in the final scene of Banjo-Kazooie as well. Kind of racing around there with a wave racer, so it's not hard to, connect those lines there. But then you also have
Wave Race 64 would have been the 6th game.
There you go. But you also have Pono as a character just next door, a character who solely delivers Banjo-Kazooie related merchandise in his store that he can sell you, that he claims are from the original game. So if any character in that whole place had anything to do with Stop and Swap, I'd argue Pono is probably the closest approximation there. But ignoring that, you can look at anything in Banjo-Kazooie, anything in Banjo-Tooie, and find some kind of tangential link, because at the end, we are just dealing with scraps and theories and stuff. And like Hyle said, there are more theories that are more sound than others. Stuff like the Black Eyes map in Rusty Bucket Bay, where you have the X mark, the treasure chest in Mad Monster Mansion, the literal pink egg paintings that surround the guy in the back of the room. Like, there's no more conclusive proof than that there is some kind of plan for Black Eye to be involved in Stop and Swap. So, like Kyle said, don't be ashamed in any of your theories. Everybody makes them, and we all run across people that, and I guess I'm part of it now, that are know-it-alls. They go, oh, no, Stop and Swap wasn't meant for that. Oh, it does this too. But yeah, like, the theories are the fun bit where you can kind of really let loose with your imagination and go, okay, imagine if like Donkey Kong 64 was doing this, and then Banjo did that, and then Perfect Dark did this. It's a whole kind of universe that they're creating with Stop and Swap potential there.
Yeah. Yeah, you said Jolly Roger's Lagoon is like the grassy knoll. Like the other hot spots, I almost said hot swaps. The other hot spots are obviously Treasure Trove Cove, Freezy Peak, Gobi's Valley. And that's not even getting into, where the other question mark eggs are located, like Mad Monster Mansion or Click Clock Wood, Rusty Bucket Bay. But, I just remember spending, hours and hours and hours in every location with my friend Elliot, playing Summer 98, just examining everything, trying to turn over every stone. I remember like the Advent calendar mural at the entrance of Freezy Peak, thinking that was some sort of grand plan, trying to beat bomb things in a different combination. It's part of the fun of this. This is why this is such an enduring mystery. This is why I would argue Stop and Swap has endured where other contemporary conspiracies and rumors like the Triforce and Ocarina of Time have not, because there is actually fire where there's smoke here. This isn't just playground rumors. There was intent behind it. And so this is something that I think boosters it and makes it like tantalizing to us, even as we are adults in our 30s. We're still here talking about Stop and Swap, and we're getting giddy like school children. That's why I love this topic, because it not only like rekindles the childlike wonder of what if, like, this is basically the video game equivalent of Supertramp's Logical Song, where it's decrying, becoming an adult and having the wonder in your life stripped from you, and you're just supposed to conform and consume and basically, be a model citizen. Stop and Swap flies in the face of that, and it makes the world magical again, Steve. And so, yes, John, continue to speculate. Come up with theories about Captain Blubber. I say the sky's the limit, and maybe one day we will discover something that none of us ever knew, and it turns out Captain Blubber is the key behind it, and then you can go back to those people and make them eat it! Make them eat it, John!
I'm just picturing the scene where the president makes his big speech in Independence Day.
Except, well, he could go on a Stop and Swap tangent, because that movie came out in, 96? Killer Instinct Gold wasn't part of Stop and Swap.
Oh, and that's another thing, too, I have to confront, because there's a lot of people online that are saying, oh, Diddy Kong Racing, that was part of Stop and Swap, and, not Killer Instinct Gold, GoldenEye, though, specifically, he keeps on being bandied about, too, and, Banjo-Kazooie is the start of it, the absolute start.
Yeah.
And you can't reverse engineer and inject code in older games. It doesn't work that way. There's nothing to unlock. So it's one of the misconceptions that people have. And of course, it's, part of the theory and everything. But that's one that I have to look at and go, look, there's 6 games that were planned. Banjo-Kazooie is the first one. We know about Tooie. We know about TK64. And then it's that point after that we can speculate the remaining N64 games. Because there are people that are going, oh, right. Blast Corps must have something in it. And you go, it can't. It's too late for that.
It can't. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why it really just pares it down to either Jet Force or Dinosaur Planet. And I think there's a good case against Jet Force personally. So, all right, let's take this other call. And then we'll talk about it, and then we'll give. I was going to say our final thoughts about Stop and Swap, but let's be honest, it won't be. Yeah. It won't be. All right.
Hi, Kongversation. It's DJ Cat calling in here from Crikey Dingo, Australia. So we're talking about Stop and Swap today. Just wanted you guys to. You've probably already given your opinions through the conversation so far, but the 6 games in question, I'd like to call them the Swapful 6, although it could be 7 if you count, depending on which game you count as part of the 6. Just wondering if you think there's any traces still of Stop and Swap still present in these games. I refer to the forum post by Laraco about the potential creepy castle egg. I checked that out on my recent playthrough of Donkey Kong 64, and yeah, it seemed like it easily could have been a possible egg location. My opinion is, if Conker's stayed as 12 Tails, it probably would have been in that, but as soon as it got redone to Bad Fur Day, they canned it out of that. The one that intrigues me the most is Jet Force Gemini, which I think could be a DKU game because of Mr. Pants' appearance, not as Anthus Pants, but as the Mr. Pants mural in Torford. But anyway, that's a different subject. Jet Force Gemini, the fact that this was announced, or this fax was sent to Rare so soon before Jet Force was going to be released, is it possible that there's still traces in the game? I'm certainly going to have a very thorough look next time I play through that game for any, convoluted, slight possible chance of a possible Stop and Swap egg. And one last thing, do you think they could have actually pulled off the Stop and Swap using the controller pack instead of hot swapping the cards? I think that's it. I think my 3 minutes is about to be up, so I better go. I'll call you back if I think of something else. Sawyer.
Thank you for the call, DJ Cat. And just on the record, DJ Cat did call us back. about something else. Unfortunately, it was after we had already started the episode, so we'll just have to table that for now. If I think of it, I will archive your call, save it for a future call sack episode. But brought up some good points here. So for starters, you brought up the forum post by Loraco about the something in Creepy Castle. Good news for you, Loraco, is Steve McCorkell, our co-host on this episode. So, Steve, what is he referring to here?
So this is my own little rabbit hole conspiracy theory that I posted on your site, because again, Stop N Swop has that, it has that allure of grabbing little scraps of information here and there. And of course, Donkey Kong 64 is probably the closest that we can grab for almost made it material. Banjo-Tooie had a little bit more development time where they could plan it through and everything, and I can see where there's teases and stuff. Banjo-Kazooie, the oblique references are there for Captain Black Eye, I get that. But Donkey Kong 64, you can see the vision of something wider planned that they had to go, take that out. And as they were taking things out, they had to make some changes here and there. And it's those changes that you can still kind of see in the game that you pass over at first glance. And people have covered it over the years going, hey, this is kind of a curiosity. And then you look at it in new light, knowing what Stop N Swop is, and you go, that could totally have something to do with Stop N Swop. Like, just looking at it with a new set of eyes. And the thing that he's talking about specifically is the Creepy Castle pillar in Donkey Kong 64. So, for those that don't know, you can basically explore this haunted level. It's very similar to Mad Monster Mansion set in a haunted castle. And you take the 5 Kongs around, you can explore the exterior, you can explore the interior. Certain Kongs can go certain places others can't go. And one of the places that Tiny Kong, the monkey with the pigtails, can go is in a museum area. And I
like how you have to explain who Tiny Kong is to the Kongversation audience.
Well, that is true, but anybody that's listening as well that is in it for Stop N Swop, they might not know. You know what I mean? The bongo conversation at the start of it, they could be going, what? A microphone and game? What the hell? So I'm just trying to provide as much context as possible. So if they've never played the game. Let me explain to
you. So there's this gorilla. He wears a necktie, right? Okay, sorry.
So anyway, if you take Tiny Kong into the museum level, you come to a hallway where there's 2 clear windows that you can see through. And one leads to a sort of factory area where you can take a teleport to another level, and the other side just has a pillar. And both areas can be explored. If you use something called a monkey port, it's a teleportation ability that you find elsewhere in the game, and you can gain access to these 2 areas that are walled off. And the first one will take you to a golden banana, which is par for the course, because you go, okay, I've used my teleportation ability, it's taken me to this area, I can complete a task, I've done my thing I'm supposed to do, I'm rewarded for it, I can continue playing, boom, boom, boom. It works. The other area takes you to this pillar, and it's this own little sectioned off room with one big pillar in the middle of the room, and when you go there, and you can get there from the previous area, so you teleport from 1 to 2, 1 being the offset sort of teleport on the outside of the level, 2 being the one that you can complete the task in. 3 takes you to another area, which is 4, the mystery pillar. So it's all connected there. It kind of takes you through a narrative path. But the problem is, when you get to the pillar, all there is there is one of Tiny Kong's balloons that you can shoot down from the ceiling, which gives you 10 bananas.
Yeah.
And those are found scattered throughout the game. You know what I mean? You can just be walking down a corridor and those will be flying around. So it seems very bizarre to just have this pillar with this balloon going around it to have its own sectioned off area. It just seems very, very peculiar. And I mean, websites from time immemorial have been talking about this pillar forever, going, what is the deal with this thing? It's curious, So
we had an early joke on DK Vine. So in the Donkey Kong 64 instruction manual, Cranky is his usual snarky self, where he's shit talking the game. And he mentions like a collectible called the Scroll of Gameplay and says you'll never find it. The joke being that Donkey Kong 64 has terrible gameplay, and that you'll never find a Scroll of Gameplay because it doesn't exist. But it flew over the head of a lot of people. So one of the earliest questions DK Vine continually got fielded with because we were a website about Donkey Kong, and therefore we were the experts, and people would say, hey, I can't find a scroll of gameplay in Donkey Kong 64, help me out. And so we there was a edited image that Chad made of this pillar with a scroll on it that was the scroll of gameplay, and it got a little bit of traction back, but that's always what I think of when I think of the pillar, is the purported location of the scroll of gameplay. But you're saying it could have housed a question mark egg.
Oh, and also, just on a tangent too, another thing that went over a lot of people's heads was the Great Girder Grapple that Cranky Kong was talking about, because he alluded to this secret level that no one would ever find in the game. And of course, if you look at a girder, it's obviously talking about Donkey Kong Arcade. But that's another one that a lot of speculation went over. People are going, how do I unlock the Great Girder Grapple? Like, what is that level after Creepy Castle? Like a lot of people were speculating on that. But going back to the pillar for a second, if you look at the Nintendo Power walkthrough for Donkey Kong 64, the guide that they published back in the day, they have a map, a kind of overview for each area that you can go in. And the museum is actually one of the maps that they feature. And if you look on the page, you'll actually see that there's a shadow in the center of the pillar. And what you can do that with Photoshop is basically, if you have an object on top of an object, you can create a layer that has a shadow underneath that object to make it more 3D, to make it pop a bit. But if you get rid of that object itself and leave the shadow, that's exactly what it looks like in the guide. So considering that Donkey Kong 64, the walkthrough was probably being made while the game was in development, it's a very real possibility that the Stop N Swop egg, which it's oval shaped, the shadow, so it kind of alludes to that, would have been the object in Donkey Kong 64 that would have had the pillar. And if that was the case, they wouldn't have had that monkey port there. It would have been opened by swapping over to Banjo. So given the idea that Creepy Castle's a haunted level and the Cyan Egg in Mad Monster Mansion is also a haunted level, there seems to be some link there. So it could be possible that by stopping and swapping from Banjo-Kazooie to Donkey Kong 64, you'd be able to venture into Creepy Castle and now go to this area that no longer has glass in the museum. So it's just, again, something to think about for the crazy whack job conspiracy theories that everybody bandies about. That one's mine, So there might not be any water to it at all, but it just seems to add up.
I was going to say, you're giving off some major Pepe Sylvia energy right now, but I agree with you all the same, because I'm sitting here nodding my head like, yeah, sounds reasonable. Yeah, I definitely see that. Yeah, if you connect the dots, absolutely. Why wouldn't it be that? And it's funny because that pillar, we scoffed at it so much when DK Vine was in its infancy, because, we kept getting questions about it, and that and the scroll of gameplay and the Great Girder Grapple, I just wrote it off as it's just part of the scenery. But you're absolutely right. It's not. There had to have been a point to it. And if Stop and Swap could be that point, I can't really think of a better use for it than housing one of those glorious question mark eggs. So I'm sitting here like, yeah, that's a great theory, Steve. In fact, it's funny because I would have never thought about that back in 1999, right? But now sitting here in 2021, I'm like, yeah, sure. Yeah. So that's just one more bit to the ever evolving and expanding Stop and Swap conspiracy lore. So, bravo to you. DJ Cat brought up another really good point that I see brought up all the time, to the point where I'm wondering the same thing. Why didn't they just utilize the controller pack for this from the get-go?
Do you want to tackle that, or should I have a go?
I don't have any answers, because it's just like, well, that makes a lot of sense. Why didn't they just do that? Is it just because they became too enamored with the idea of hot swapping that they didn't bother utilizing it, and then it was too late? Or I don't know. So
it could have been a combination of that. I think at that point, though, they were just looking at the idea of, you own one cartridge, you own another cartridge, those two can communicate, that's all you need. You just need to play our games. And bringing a pack into it all of a sudden requires a mandatory purchase that not a whole lot of people might have. You know, like even
Yeah.
packaging Donkey Kong 64 with the expansion pack was an effort done knowing that, hey, not everybody's going to have an expansion pack with the N64. Why don't we package this in with it? And that way, when you buy our game, you automatically have this device that's mandatory for playing, and it's you know, included in the packaging of the game, so nobody misses out. So the second that you go, oh, you require a transfer pack, or you require some kind of you know, other device that for memory transfer, you cut out a significant portion of your audience, you know.
Sure. Although, you know, games that did feature it, it was always advertised on the box as, you know, controller pack.
Yeah.
Right? Like Mario Kart 64, that's the only way you could have saved your ghost data in time trials, which is really frustrating. And also every time you got hit in the head with one of the coconuts or pieces of fruit in DK's Jungle Parkway, then you would have that message up on the screen the entire duration of the time travel.
Cannot save.
Yeah, and I'm like, just like, fuck off. Like, how do you not account for all those coconuts? They're everywhere. But anyway, you know, like, I get that, and ultimately, like, this is why maybe they should have gone to Nintendo from the start, and then they could have, like, planned for this, and, like, this is a really great idea, let's just use the controller pack, because then we can skirt all of these issues, because, yeah, you just brought up the expansion pack, and I'm just sitting here thinking, wow, on top of all of this drama, they also had to deal with the game-crashing bug in Donkey Kong 64 that required the expansion pack packaged in every game, probably costing them a significant amount of money, chipping away out of their big holiday release. Was it dismissed as a myth? I thought that was confirmed.
I thought it was. Somebody ended up looking through the memory of Donkey Kong 64. They went very in depth with it, where they were looking at the release date schedule and everything, and they went, okay, to this point of the expansion pack being required would have been like a late minute addition to stop this bug, and they're like, we have evidence that it was from the very start that it was being used, because it checks memory addresses and stuff like that. So somebody actually did a really in-depth sort of deep dive on YouTube where they do break the whole thing down. They're like, it can't be possible because it relies too much on the expansion pack for even, you know, basic things in the game that wouldn't be possible without it. So,
well, I'll say this much. If that's true, I hope it is, because that would boost my esteem of Donkey Kong 64 just a little bit, because I've lived with this assumption, this common held wisdom that there is this game breaking bug, and that the only reason the expansion pack was used was because it was the only thing that like smoothed it over, and it didn't actually require the expansion pack. Now, granted, Donkey Kong 64 is a visually impressive game in a lot of ways, so like, when it came out, I totally bought that it needed the expansion pack, you know, for all those swinging hallway lights. But, you know, then you hear this common bandied about wisdom that, no, actually, that's just a farce. And you're like, oh, and then you grow more and more steadily negative towards the game. I would love a reason to think more highly of Donkey Kong 64, at least from a technical standpoint. So I hope that's true. Anyway, yeah. Then DJ Cat also talked about the identity of the 6 games, and you know we've already kind of treaded over that territory, but then made this comment that Jet Force Gemini should be DKU because the Mr. Pants graffiti, and I'm like, that's not a physical appearance. That's not a physical appearance. Mr. Pants' first physical appearance as an actual character in a video game was Banjo-Tooie. So you can't like retroactively apply Jet Force Gemini to that because it wasn't a physical appearance. And even if it was a physical appearance, Mr. Pants was not a native-born DKU character until Banjo-Tooie, which would mean Mr. Pants was not DKU. And that means not only would Jet Force Gemini not be DKU, but its Mr. Pants would not be DKU, which would just be the most heartbreaking thing I've ever heard. So, yeah, I do really wish Jet Force was DKU. I have to say that much. You know, we've been talking about like, ooh, wouldn't it be weird if Perfect Dark was somehow DKU from all of this? Jet Force, I think, is a big missed opportunity. And I know like Rare didn't really sit around planning like this shared universe like we like to imagine. It's kind of a happy accident that it happened at all. And of course, now in the glow of the MCU and stuff, they probably would have, but it's a shame they didn't think all this through, because Jet Force, I think, would have worked in the DKU, especially, and as I always bring this up, when talking about Stop and Swap conspiracy theories, when Gobi says he's going to go off to the lava world, that should have been Jet Force Gemini. And you should have met Gobi in Jet Force Gemini. Oh, Gobi went into outer space to get away from Banjo and Kazooie. That would have been impressive. And then, you might have even utilized Stop and Swap in there via Gobi. I don't know,
now this
Rare.
is starting to sound Pepe Sylvia Hyle.
I don't know, Rare, from over 20 years ago. I've got some good ideas. Maybe you should listen to me.
Well, that's the other thing, too. I think at some point, they would have had to plan out Stop and Swap in a way from a design document. So there is potentially a lost design document out there that does show, hey, this is what we plan to do with Banjo, this is what we plan to do with Donkey Kong 64. So I'm hoping maybe Paul posts that next. We could have something else to kind of chew on.
Yeah, give it 2 days. Who knows?
The mandatory 48 hours? No, here's a piece of gaming history that we're going to obsess over for the next, millennia.
I assume we'll be talking about Stop and Swap again on the Kongversation at some point. But as far as we're aware, as all pertinent information goes, circa May 2021, this is it. We're at the end of the road here. So, final thoughts, not just on the revelations that Paul brought to light, but also just Stop and Swap in general, Steve. I want to hear your take, because I do consider you to be the expert on Stop and Swap and Rare Cows. But I think that, as far as anyone out there, you have the best understanding, not just from a technical standpoint, but also you get the magic of it. You're not just looking at it in binary code here. You're looking at it as the excitement that it generates and the imagination that it spurs. So I really want to hear what else you have to say as your final statement on Stop and Swap until Paul wrecks it all in a couple days.
Yeah. Well, it's that thing again. It's such an enduring mystery that literally has taken us 20 years to even receive new information that we're still talking about today. And, it has extended the life of all of Rare's N64 games, but just that vision of having an ability to exchange these items throughout their entire N64 lineage is so alluring. And you can find little tangential links and wishful thinking and all that kind of stuff. But the idea that was a plan at one point in Rare's history where they were trying to do something really next level. And yeah, unfortunately it was quashed just on technical limitations alone, but it does kind of emphasize that Rare is this kind of big thinking, we'll have an idea here in 1998 that's not going to come commonplace until the late 2000s. It's something that you have to credit the company and all the people that work for it. And two, we have to thank Paul. We have to thank anybody that worked on Stop and Swap, anybody that came forward with information. For us, this is a joy to play, a joy to relive, and just a joy to babble on like incoherent assholes, chaining on conspiracy theories and tinfoil hats. We just love it.
Yeah, I would also like to give a special thanks to the Director of Technical Support for Nintendo of America, circa October 1999, because this is probably the best laugh I've had since the pandemic started. This was really uproarious. This is not only a masterclass at corporate doublespeak, but it's just as an artifact and as somewhat as something that distills the way you always sort of knew Nintendo must have felt about this. Bravo. Mwah. I couldn't have hoped for a better document.
Yeah. It's a great drinking game, too, if you take a shot every time he says schedule. So there is that.
Well, and I also want to thank everyone in the live stream chat. Oh, my God. So Ray Day Pinball is screaming Jolly Roger's Lagoon. It's Lagoon. Were we saying Bay? Or did the call say Bay?
The caller said Bay, to be fair. But I mean, okay. Mario 64, Banjo, they both use a term of Jolly Rogers, so it's a easy enough mistake to make. But it is in fact Lagoon, and you've lost your DK Vine license for forever suggesting that, caller. I'm sorry.
Now, hold on, Steve. Has anyone ever bothered to look in Jolly Roger's Bay in Super Mario 64 and then pull out the cartridge?
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.